The conference room went silent when I walked in carrying the manila envelope. My brother Marcus sat at the head of the table like he owned the place, fingers drumming against the polished wood in that arrogant rhythm I'd grown to hate. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat, wringing her hands. Aunt Beverly wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at the empty notepad in front of her. Uncle James cleared his throat twice, the sound echoing in the tension. They all expected me to cry, to beg, to crumble the way I always had when Marcus got his way. Instead, I placed the envelope on the table between us, let the silence stretch until it became unbearable, and said 5 words that changed everything. I know what you did. Marcus's face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. His fingers stopped their drumming mid-tap. His wife Tanya looked confused, glancing between us. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I watched my golden brother realize he'd been caught. But before I tell you what was in that envelope, let me take you back 3 months to where this nightmare began, to the day I found out my inheritance had vanished into thin air. 3 months earlier, I sat in Attorney Philip Warren's office on a gray Tuesday afternoon, still numb from Dad's funeral. The leather chair felt too big for my body, the room too quiet except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Dad had been gone exactly 2 weeks, and I still found myself reaching for my phone to call him, still expected to hear his truck pull into the driveway. The grief sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. Mr. Warren cleared his throat gently and opened a thick brown folder, the kind that holds a lifetime of decisions and planning. Your father's estate is straightforward, he said in that careful lawyer voice. The house goes to your mother, as expected. His savings and investment accounts, which total roughly $400,000, are to be split equally between you and your brother Marcus. My heart squeezed painfully. $200,000 each. Dad had worked his whole life for this money, every single dollar. He'd driven the same beat-up truck for 15 years, packed his lunch in a paper bag every single day, skipped family vacations so he could put money away. This money represented every sacrifice, every extra shift, every time he said no to himself so he could say yes to our future. I leaned forward in the leather chair, suddenly feeling cold despite the warm office. What kind of complication? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Warren adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a gesture I would learn meant he was uncomfortable with what came next. Marcus visited me last week, on Thursday. He presented documents showing that your father had changed the distribution terms approximately 2 months before his death. According to these papers, Marcus is to receive $300,000, and you receive $100,000. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The room tilted slightly. That's impossible, I whispered, gripping the armrests. Dad wouldn't do that. He always said we'd be treated equally. Always. Mr. Warren's expression was careful, measured, the look of a man who delivered bad news many times before. The documents appear legitimate on the surface. They have what looks like your father's signature, 2 witness signatures, everything properly notarized and dated. Legally, they seem to be in order. My hands shook in my lap. I clasped them together to make it stop. Dad had been so sick those final months, weak and confused from all the medication. The cancer had eaten away at him until he barely recognized some days. But changing his will to favor Marcus by $100,000? It made no sense. We'd always been treated equally growing up, even when Marcus was the star quarterback and I was just the quiet kid in the background. I drove home in a complete daze, barely seeing the road in front of me, running a red light without even noticing until horns blared. My small apartment felt smaller than usual when I got there, the walls pressing in like they were trying to suffocate me. I called Marcus 3 times that evening. Each call went straight to voicemail. I left messages that got progressively more desperate. Marcus, it's me. Call me back about Dad's will. Then, Marcus, seriously, I need to talk to you. Finally, at 9:30 that night, my phone buzzed with a text message, * lawyer stuff is complicated. Dad knew I needed it more. Business expenses, you know. Don't make this weird, okay? * don't make this weird. Like I was being dramatic. Like I was overreacting to our father's dying wishes being completely altered. Like $100,000 was pocket change I should just shrug off. I stared at that message for over an hour, reading it again and again, trying to find some explanation that made sense. But nothing did. Something wasn't right. Something felt deeply, terribly wrong. Dad had visited me exactly 2 months before he died, during what would have been the exact time period of this supposed will change. We'd met at his favorite diner, the one with the cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who knew his order by heart. That morning at the diner felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Dad had been thin by then, his hands shaking slightly as he stirred sugar into his coffee. But his mind had been clear that day, clearer than it had been in weeks. He'd reached across the table and squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "You and Marcus will be taken care of equally," he'd said, his voice firm despite his weakness. "That's really important to me, kiddo. I don't want there to be any fighting after I'm gone. Equal means equal. You both get the same, you both know you were loved the same." I remembered his exact words because I'd written them in my journal that night, wanting to preserve every moment I had left with him. He had meant what he said. I was certain of it. The next morning, I called Mr. Warren's office before I even had breakfast. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I want to see the documents," I said. "The ones Marcus brought in. I want to see everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's certainly within your rights as a beneficiary. Can you come by this afternoon, say around 3? At exactly 3 p.m., I sat across from Mr. Warren's massive oak desk as he slid photocopies across the polished surface. My father's signature stared up at me from the page, shaky but recognizable. My hands trembled as I picked up the papers. The signature looked like Dad's, that distinctive slant to his capital T, the way his last name always trailed off at the end. But his handwriting had been deteriorating those last months. I'd watched him struggle to sign birthday cards, watched his hands shake with the effort. The date on the document showed March 15th, just 8 weeks before Dad died. 2 witnesses had signed below his name, Karen Foster and Timothy Cruz. I read those names 3 times. I didn't recognize either one. Not from Dad's work, not from his friend group, not from anywhere. "Who are these witnesses?" I asked, looking up at Mr. Warren. He checked his notes, flipping through a yellow legal pad. According to the documentation Marcus provided, they're independent witnesses he arranged to be present for the signing. It's somewhat unusual to bring your own witnesses rather than using the lawyer's staff, but it's perfectly legal. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs. "Can I speak with them? To verify they actually witnessed Dad signing this?" Something flickered across Mr. Warren's face. "Concern, maybe. Or suspicion. You can certainly try. I can provide you with the contact information listed on the documents." I left his office 20 minutes later with copies of everything and a growing certainty settling in my stomach like ice. Something was very, very wrong. Back at my apartment, I spread the documents across my small kitchen table and studied every single detail. The signature looked right at first glance, but the more I stared at it, the more questions I had. Dad's hands had been so shaky by March. Would he have been able to sign this clearly? I pulled out my laptop and opened a search engine, typing in Karen Foster first. Pages of results came up, but none connected to Dad or our family or anything that made sense. Then I tried Timothy Cruz. Same thing, dozens of people with that name, but nobody relevant. Then I tried a different approach, something that made my pulse quicken. I searched their names together with the words notary and witness services. Timothy Cruz's name appeared on a professional website advertising mobile notary services. Quick, discreet, professional notary services, the site promised in bold letters. Available for estate planning, real estate transactions, and private document execution. No questions asked. My hands started shaking again. Professional witnesses. People you could hire. People who would sign anything if you paid them enough. I grabbed my phone before I could second-guess myself and dialed the number listed on the website. My heart hammered against my ribs as it rang once, twice, 3 times. A man answered on the 4th ring, his voice professional and neutral. Cruz Notary Services, this is Timothy. I tried to keep my voice steady and casual. Hi there. I'm calling about a document you witnessed back in March. For Theodore Blake? The silence that followed lasted too long. Way too long. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely, becoming guarded and careful. I witness a lot of documents for a lot of people. What's this regarding exactly? A will modification, I said, watching my reflection in the darkened laptop screen. Dated March 15th. You and Karen Foster were listed as the witnesses. More silence, heavier this time. When he spoke again, I could hear the tension in every word. Look, I don't discuss client matters over the phone. That's confidential. If there's a legal issue here, you need to have an attorney contact me directly. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat staring at my phone, my reflection staring back from the black screen. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. A legitimate witness, someone who had actually watched my dying father sign a legal document, wouldn't have been so immediately defensive. My best friend Nicole worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm. I called her that same night, my voice shaking so badly I could hardly get the words out. I explained everything, the changed will, the hospital records I suspected existed, Timothy Cruz's suspicious reaction. This sounds really fishy, Nicole said immediately, anger creeping into her voice. Like, seriously fishy. This isn't normal at all. Listen, my firm has a private investigator we use sometimes for complex cases. Former police detective, really good at his job. He knows how to find things people try to hide. Want me to ask if he'll meet with you? 2 days later, on a cold Thursday morning, I sat in a corner coffee shop across from Vincent Torres. He was a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to read everything about you in seconds. I showed him all the documents, explained Dad's deteriorating condition those final months, told him about Timothy Cruz's defensive response and sudden hang-up. Vincent studied the papers for a long time, not saying anything, just reading and thinking. Finally, he looked up at me. Your instinct is right, he said flatly. Something's definitely off here. This whole thing stinks. Give me 1 week, maybe 2. I'll need access to some records, might need you to sign some releases. That week felt like the longest year of my life. I couldn't eat more than a few bites at meals. I couldn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours before jerking awake. I jumped every single time my phone buzzed, thinking it might be Vincent with answers. Marcus texted twice during that week, asking when I'd sign the final paperwork so everything could be settled. I made vague excuses. Just getting my affairs in order, I told him. Want to make sure I understand everything. Mom called worried about why things were taking so long, why the estate wasn't settled yet. It's just legal stuff, Mom, I told her, hating myself for the lie but knowing I couldn't explain. Not yet. Not until I had real proof. Not until I knew for certain. On day 6, my phone rang with an unknown number. My hand shook as I answered. We need to meet, Vincent's voice said without preamble. Right now. How fast can you get to my office? An hour later, I sat across from him in a small office that smelled like old coffee and paper. He opened a folder thick with documents and photographs. Your brother paid Timothy Cruz and Karen Foster $500 each to sign as witnesses, Vincent said, his voice flat and professional. My vision blurred at the edges. The room seemed to tilt sideways. So Dad never actually signed this? Vincent's expression was grim as he pushed more papers toward me. I went deeper than just the witnesses. I pulled your father's medical records from that week. March 15th, the exact date stamped on these will modification documents, your father was admitted to Mercy General Hospital with severe pneumonia. He was admitted at 6 a.m. and stayed for 4 full days. He was on oxygen, heavily sedated for pain management. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. So he couldn't have possibly signed anything that day. Physically impossible, Vincent confirmed. And there's more. I wasn't done digging. He pulled out another set of papers clipped together. I had a handwriting expert, a forensic document examiner, compare the signature on this will modification to multiple samples of your father's real signature from before he got sick. Bank documents, birthday cards, work papers. The expert's conclusion is definitive, it's a forgery. A pretty good one, someone who'd practiced, but definitely a forgery. My hands pressed flat against the table to stop the shaking that had taken over my whole body. My brother had forged our dying father's signature to steal my inheritance. The betrayal was so massive, so complete, I couldn't even process the full weight of it. What do I do now? I asked, my voice coming out small and broken. Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. You have several options. Criminal charges for forgery, fraud, and theft. Civil action to reverse the will modification and possibly sue for damages. But here's what I'd recommend, at least as a first step. He paused, making sure I was really listening. Gather your whole family together. All of them. Present the evidence in front of everyone. Give Marcus one single chance to make this right before you involve the police and courts. Because once you file criminal charges, there's absolutely no going back. Your family will be destroyed permanently. I understood his reasoning immediately. Once police were involved, once charges were filed, the family would fracture beyond any hope of repair. But looking at that forged signature, at the cold proof of my brother's calculated betrayal, I felt something hard and sharp forming in my chest. Something that felt like steel. I want my mother there, I said quietly but firmly. And Aunt Beverly, Uncle James, his wife Tanya. Everyone who matters. I want them all to see what he did. Vincent nodded slowly. Family meeting. Get them all in one room. I'll be there as backup, show the evidence, walk them through what I found. We'll make it official. Asterisk. We set the date for 3 weeks out. That gave me time to prepare everything perfectly, time to get all the documents organized, time to rent a proper conference room. The hardest part was pretending everything was completely normal. Marcus called twice more asking about the paperwork, his voice getting more impatient each time. What's the holdup? He demanded on the second call. This should have been done weeks ago. Soon, I told him, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Just making sure everything is in order. Dad would want it done right. If Marcus suspected anything at all, his voice never showed it. He sounded relaxed, confident, even a little amused by what he probably saw as my perfectionism. Why wouldn't he be confident? In his mind, he'd gotten away with it completely. He thought he'd beaten me like he always had. Mom invited me to Sunday dinner like she did every week. I went, sat at the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals, sat directly across from Marcus. I watched him laugh and joke with Tanya about their vacation plans. I watched him ask Mom to pass the potatoes. I watched him act like he hadn't stolen from his dying father and his own sister. He'd always been the favored one growing up. The athlete with the full-ride scholarship, the charmer who could talk his way out of anything, the golden son who could do no wrong. 2 days before the scheduled family meeting, Marcus showed up at my apartment completely unannounced. I heard the knock and opened the door to find him leaning against the frame, hands in his pockets, expression casual but eyes calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. We need to talk about Dad's estate, he said, pushing past me into my small living room without waiting for an invitation. This whole thing is taking way too long. The lawyer's getting annoyed. The paperwork needs to be signed so we can all move forward. I kept my face completely blank, emotionless. I'm almost ready. He turned around, studying me with that superior look he'd perfected over 30 years. What's the holdup exactly? This isn't complicated. The will is clear. You sign, I sign, we get our money. Why are you making this difficult? Just making sure everything's right, I said carefully, each word measured. Making sure every detail is exactly what Dad wanted. He would have wanted that, don't you think? Something flickered in his eyes then. Annoyance maybe, or possibly the very first hint of worry that something wasn't going according to his plan. Dad's gone, he said, his voice hardening. What he wanted doesn't change what's written in the documents. Just sign the papers, take your 100,000, and let's all move on with our lives. His tone, that casual dismissiveness, made something deep inside me finally snap. Years of being talked down to, years of being the overlooked one, years of watching him get away with everything, it all crystallized in that moment. Is that really what you think this is about? I asked quietly. Just money? Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Don't act all noble with me. We both know you desperately need that 100,000. Your job barely covers your rent. You drive a car that's falling apart. This money will change your life, so stop pretending it doesn't matter. The condescension in his voice was so familiar it almost didn't hurt anymore. He'd always talked to me like this, like I was lesser, slower, someone who needed to be managed and tolerated. You're absolutely right, I said softly, forcing myself to meet his eyes. I do need it. Every penny. That's exactly why I want to make absolutely certain everything is done exactly as Dad truly intended. I owe him that much. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for something. Then he shrugged, apparently satisfied. Fine. Whatever makes you feel better. But this needs to be completely done by next week. I'm not waiting around forever. After he left, I sat on my couch for 20 minutes just shaking. He had absolutely no idea what was coming in 48 hours. No clue that his entire world was about to collapse. The morning of the family meeting, I woke up at 5 a.m. even though my alarm wasn't set until 6. My hands were steady as I got dressed, steady as I loaded all the evidence carefully into my bag, steady as I drove through empty early morning streets to the office building where I'd rented a proper conference room. Vincent arrived at 8, carrying his laptop and a portable projector. You ready for this? He asked, studying my face. I thought about Dad and all his sacrifices. I thought about Marcus's smug confidence, his certainty that he'd won. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Family members started arriving at exactly 10. Mom came first, confused and worried about why I'd called this mysterious meeting. Aunt Beverly and Uncle James followed, whispering to each other. Then Marcus's wife Tanya arrived, looking irritated at being summoned on a Saturday morning. Finally Marcus himself walked in at 10:05, moving with that athletic confidence that had always defined him. He took the seat at the head of the table like it was his natural place. So what's all this about? He demanded, looking around at everyone. Why the big dramatic family meeting? I didn't answer immediately. I waited until everyone was seated, until the room was completely quiet. Then I placed the manila envelope on the table between us and spoke 5 words that would change everything forever. I know what you did. Marcus's face drained of all color instantly, like someone had literally pulled a plug and let all the blood drain out. What are you talking about? He asked, but his voice had changed, gotten higher, tighter. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, letting the tension build. March 15th, I said clearly. The day you claim Dad changed his will to give you an extra $100,000. I pulled out the first document, placed it in the center of the table where everyone could see. This is Dad's hospital admission record from Mercy General. He was admitted with severe pneumonia at 6 a.m. on March 15th. He stayed for 4 full days. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus's mouth opened but no sound came out at all. I pulled out the next set of papers, my hands perfectly steady now. These are bank records showing that you, Marcus Blake, paid Timothy Cruz $500 on March 12th and Karen Foster $500 on the same day. 3 days before the supposed will modification. Aunt Beverly's hand clutched at her chest. Uncle James leaned forward, squinting at the documents. And these, I continued, pulling out the handwriting analysis report, are the findings from a forensic document examiner showing that Dad's signature on your documents is a forgery. The room exploded into chaos. Mom started crying immediately, deep-wrenching sobs. Uncle James lunged halfway out of his chair before Vincent stepped forward with a hand raised. Aunt Beverly stared at Marcus like she was seeing a complete stranger, like her nephew had been replaced by someone she didn't recognize. You forged Dad's signature? Mom's voice was barely a whisper, broken and disbelieving. While he was dying in the hospital, you forged his signature? Marcus found his voice finally, but it came out defensive and sharp. This is insane. She's making all of this up because she's jealous I got more. She's always been jealous of me. I turned to Vincent calmly. He connected his laptop to the projector I'd set up earlier and pulled up bank statements, hospital records, the handwriting analysis, every single piece of evidence magnified on the white wall behind me in brutal clarity. Your son paid these two witnesses, Vincent said in a flat professional tone. Your husband was physically hospitalized the exact day he supposedly signed these documents. The signature has been examined by a certified forensic expert and determined to be fake. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't prove any of this. This is all circumstantial. I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. Yes, I can prove it. And you know I can. That's why you look terrified right now. The fight drained out of him visibly. I watched it happen in real time, saw his shoulders slump forward, saw his face age what looked like 10 years in 10 seconds. I needed the money, he said finally, his voice cracking and desperate. The business was failing badly. I had debts piling up, creditors calling every day. I just thought, you thought you could steal from your dying father and your sister, Aunt Beverly cut in, her voice like ice, colder than I'd ever heard it. You thought you could forge a dead man's signature and get away with it. Mom was still crying, but when she looked up at Marcus, something fundamental had shifted in her expression. It was disappointment so deep and profound it hurt to witness. How could you do this, she whispered. How could you betray your own father? Your own sister? Marcus looked around the room desperately, finding no allies anywhere, no escape from the truth now laid bare. His wife Tanya stood up silently and walked out of the room without saying a single word, the door clicking shut behind her with finality. So what happens now? Marcus asked, looking directly at me for the first time. You're calling the police? Having me arrested? I let the silence stretch out, let him sit in the uncertainty. This was the moment I'd been carefully preparing for, the decision I'd been weighing for 3 weeks. Everyone in the room waited, barely breathing. I'll give you exactly one chance, I said quietly but firmly. You have 72 hours to make this completely right. You sign papers with Mr. Warren returning the inheritance to an equal split, exactly as Dad actually intended. You pay back the $500 each that you spent on fake witnesses. And you write Mom a letter explaining everything, taking full responsibility, with no excuses or justifications. Marcus's face flushed dark red. And if I don't do all that? Vincent stepped forward, opening his folder. Then we file criminal charges for forgery, fraud, and theft of estate assets. You'll be looking at 3 to 5 years in prison, plus you'll have to pay everything back anyway, plus legal fees, plus damages. I watched my brother calculate frantically, watched him realize with growing horror that he had absolutely no moves left, no way out, no clever solution. Fine, he finally spat, but the anger was hollow now. You win. You happy now? I shook my head slowly. This was never about winning, Marcus. This is about Dad getting what he actually wanted, his children treated equally, fairly. This is about honoring his sacrifices instead of spitting on them. Marcus left without another word, walking out with his shoulders hunched. The rest of the family sat in complete stunned silence until Mom reached across the table with shaking hands and took mine, squeezing hard.